Stories and Documentary Network.
The Hephthalites, commonly referred to as the White Huns, were a powerful and enigmatic Central Asian nomadic confederation that rose to prominence during the 5th and 6th centuries CE. Their origins remain a subject of scholarly debate, yet their impact on the historical trajectory of Central and South Asia is undeniable. Unlike the Huns led by Attila, who threatened the Roman Empire, the Hephthalites exerted their influence east of the Caspian Sea, establishing a formidable presence in regions such as Bactria, Sogdiana, Turkestan, and even northern India. They played a critical role in shaping the post-classical world, acting as both destroyers and assimilators of older civilizations, while simultaneously introducing a unique cultural synthesis born from their interactions with Iranic, Indian, and steppe cultures. To understand the Hephthalites' rise, one must consider the complex geopolitical dynamics of Central Asia in the aftermath of the decline of the earlier Hunnic confederations and the weakening of settled empires. The disintegration of the Kushan Empire in the 3rd century and the weakening of the Gupta and Sassanid empires by the 5th century created a power vacuum that nomadic groups like the Hephthalites were quick to exploit. As heirs to the traditions of earlier nomads such as the Scythians and Zionites, the Hephthalites combined martial prowess with political pragmatism, establishing a state that endured for nearly a century and a half. During this time, they challenged the power of the Persian Sassanids, defeated the mighty Gupta Empire, and controlled strategic trade routes along the Silk Road. What sets the Hephthalites apart in the historical record is their dual identity as both conquerors and patrons of culture. They waged fierce wars against established empires such as the Sassanids, capturing and killing Persian King Peroz I in 484 CE, and made deep incursions into India, hastening the decline of the Gupta dynasty. At the same time, they were deeply embedded in the cultural and religious milieus of the regions they ruled. In Gandhara, Turkestan, and Bactria, they left behind evidence of a vibrant artistic legacy, showcasing Buddhist iconography, Hellenistic-influenced sculptures, and syncretic motifs. Their coinage reflects a fusion of Iranian and Indian artistic conventions, while archaeological remains reveal a nomadic elite gradually integrating with sedentary urban societies. The Hephthalite Empire, though relatively short-lived, had a lasting influence on the history of Eurasia. Their rise and eventual fall not only reshaped the balance of power between Central Asia, Persia, and India, but also served as a bridge in the transmission of culture, religion, and trade across these regions. The vacuum left by their decline in the mid-6th century was soon filled by new powers like the Western Turks and the Sassanids, yet traces of Hephthalite heritage lingered in local dynasties and cultural memory for centuries. The origins of the Hephthalites, often called the White Huns, remain one of the most debated aspects of early Central Asian history. Although they rose to prominence in the 5th and 6th centuries CE, their deeper ancestry is clouded by conflicting historical sources and limited archaeological data. Were the Hephthalites of Iranian stock, a branch of the Huns, or a hybrid people formed through centuries of nomadic migration and intermingling? Scholars have proposed varying theories, each shaped by interpretations of Chinese chronicles, Persian annals, Indian texts, and material evidence unearthed in regions once under Hephthalite control. Theories of ethnic origin: Iranian, Hunnic, or mixed. One of the earliest and most prevalent theories holds that the Hephthalites were of Iranian origin, possibly descended from earlier nomadic groups such as the Saka, Scythians, or Kushanized Bactrians. Proponents of this view point to their language, which is believed to have been an Eastern Iranian dialect akin to Bactrian, and their use of Iranian iconography in coinage and art. Furthermore, the Hephthalites often settled in traditionally Iranian-speaking territories such as Turkestan and Bactria, which strengthens the argument for a cultural and perhaps ethnic Iranian base. Another major theory connects the Hephthalites with the Hunnic world, branding them as a branch of the Huns who splintered off from the main Hunnic body that moved westward toward Europe in the 4th century. Chinese sources such as the Weishu, Book of Wei, refer to the Hephthalites as Yi Tai, identifying them as a branch of the earlier Sionites, or Huna. This theory suggests that the Hephthalites were part of the broader Hunnic confederation but evolved into a distinct political entity after migrating southward into Central Asia. This has led some scholars to refer to them as Eastern Huns, or more specifically, White Huns, in contrast to the Red Huns, Alkhans, and other related groups. A third, increasingly accepted theory posits a hybrid origin, arguing that the Hephthalites emerged as a result of centuries of nomadic integration among Iranian-speaking steppe tribes, Central Asian Indo-European populations, and Turkic or Hunnic elements. Their bilingual inscriptions, multicultural art, and broad geographic spread suggest a multi-ethnic confederation rather than a homogeneous ethnic group. This would align with the fluid identity of many nomadic empires, which often formed through the amalgamation of various tribes and clans under a unifying leadership. While often grouped under the broader term Huns, the Hephthalites were distinct from other contemporaneous groups such as the Kidarites, Alkhan Huns, and Sionites. The Kidarites, who preceded the Hephthalites in Bactria and Sogdiana, were likely of Iranian origin and often minted coins in the name of the Kushan kings. They represented a transitional phase between the Kushan and Hephthalite eras, but were ultimately displaced by the latter. The Alkhan Huns, another related group, were active mainly in northern India. They left behind numerous inscriptions and coins, and were responsible for considerable destruction in the Indian subcontinent. Although similar in many ways, the Alkhans and Hephthalites operated in distinct regions and may have had separate leadership. The Sionites, from whom the Hephthalites may have descended or at least borrowed heavily in terms of culture and military organization, were earlier nomadic groups of Central Asia known to the Chinese and Persians. What differentiates the Hephthalites is their establishment of a centralized empire that not only controlled major cities and trade routes, but also engaged diplomatically and militarily with the great powers of their time. While the other groups were mostly transient raiders or short-lived dynasties, the Hephthalites constructed a durable power base from which they influenced vast territories for over a century. The earliest identifiable Hephthalite settlements appear in regions such as Bactria and Turkestan, where they either displaced or absorbed the existing Kidarite populations. They likely followed a tribal confederation model, common among steppe nomads, with power concentrated in the hands of a Khagan or Yabgu, ruler. Their mobile lifestyle was suited to the steppes and river valleys of Central Asia, but over time, they adapted to ruling over urban centers with established bureaucracies, indicating a transition from pure nomadism to a semi-sedentary imperial system. The tribal elite appears to have ruled over a largely sedentary and multicultural population, maintaining order through a mix of tribute, military oversight, and local alliances. This adaptability was one of the factors behind their success, allowing them to govern effectively in diverse regions from Persia to India. The earliest appearance of the Hephthalites as a distinct power is recorded in Bactria, the historic region straddling northern Afghanistan and parts of southern Central Asia. By the early 5th century CE, they had begun to assert control over this strategic region, rich in fertile valleys and key trade routes along the Silk Road. Bactria, once the heart of the Greco-Bactrian and Kushan empires, was a cultural and economic crossroads, which made it a desirable base for any rising power. From their base in Bactria, the Hephthalites moved northward and eastward into Transoxiana, a region defined by the rivers Amu Darya, Oxus, and Sir Darya, Jaxartes. This area included major trading cities and fertile oases that were vital for maintaining caravans and military campaigns. Their nomadic background gave them the military edge to subdue these territories quickly, while their willingness to incorporate settled populations into their administrative framework allowed them to hold these lands over time. By establishing control over Bactria and Transoxiana, the Hephthalites gained a crucial advantage. They now dominated a transcontinental artery that connected China, India, and Persia. This not only gave them wealth, but also geopolitical leverage. Following their consolidation in Bactria and Transoxiana, the Hephthalites extended their reach to Sogdiana and Khwarezm, ancient regions located in present-day Uzbekistan and western Turkmenistan. These areas were significant not only for their agricultural productivity and strategic placement along the Silk Road, but also for their role as cultural and economic hubs. Sogdiana in particular was home to merchant elites who played key roles in long-distance trade between China and the Mediterranean. The conquest of Sogdiana is less well documented than other campaigns, but appears to have occurred by the mid-5th century. It is likely that the Hephthalites employed a combination of force and negotiation, offering local elites a degree of autonomy in exchange for loyalty and tribute. In this sense, the Hephthalite approach was similar to that of many nomadic empires. Decentralization combined with military supremacy. In Khwarezm, a region known for its strong local culture and autonomy, the Hephthalites probably encountered stiffer resistance. Nevertheless, by the late 5th century, they had brought the region into their growing empire. This expansion solidified their dominance in the northeast and gave them control over vast steppe and oasis zones that served both military and commercial purposes. A critical turning point in the Hephthalite rise was their overthrow of the Kidarites, another nomadic dynasty that had established itself in Bactria and northern India after the decline of the Kushans. The Kidarites, often referred to as the Little Kushans, had managed to mint coins in their own name and even exert limited control over parts of the Gupta Empire's northwestern frontier. However, they were unable to withstand the Hephthalite onslaught. By approximately circa 460 CE, the Hephthalites had decisively defeated the Kidarites, likely through a series of military confrontations in Bactria and possibly along the Hindu Kush. This victory not only eliminated a major rival, but also granted the Hephthalites access to India through the mountain passes of the northwest frontier, such as the Khyber Pass and Bolan Pass. These routes would later be used in their campaigns into the Indian subcontinent. The fall of the Kidarites also had symbolic significance. It marked the end of Kushano-Sasanian dominance in Central Asia and opened the way for the Hephthalites to become the primary Central Asian power between the Sasanian and Indian worlds. Unlike purely nomadic groups that avoided urbanization, the Hephthalites established political and administrative centers in key cities across their domain. Chief among these was Balkh, present-day northern Afghanistan, a city of immense historical importance and once a cultural capital of the Kushan Empire. Balkh served as a Hephthalite capital, where they minted coins and likely hosted diplomatic embassies and royal courts. In Samarkand, a city in Sogdiana with deep Hellenistic and Persian roots, the Hephthalites developed another important hub. Although not their capital, Samarkand's role in commerce and intellectual exchange made it a prized possession. Other urban centers that played a role in Hephthalite governance included Herat, Merv, and Nishapur, cities with Persian or Kushano-Bactrian infrastructure that the Hephthalites repurposed for their administrative needs. These cities enabled the Hephthalites to develop tax systems, regulate trade, and interact with local populations through more than just force. The Hephthalites were not merely conquerors. They also engaged in sophisticated diplomacy, particularly with their two major neighbors, the Sassanid Empire to the west and the Indian polities to the south. Initially, relations with the Sassanids were tense. The Hephthalites raided Persian borderlands and inflicted a major defeat on the Sasanian king Peroz I, killing him in battle around 484 CE. In the aftermath, the Hephthalites imposed heavy tribute on the Sasanian state and maintained a dominant position for decades. However, the Persians did not forget this humiliation. In time, under Khosrow I, the Sassanids would form an alliance with the Western Turks to defeat the Hephthalites, a topic explored later in this essay. With regard to India, the Hephthalites played a dual role. On the one hand, they conducted military campaigns into northern India, weakening the Gupta Empire and contributing to its fragmentation. On the other hand, they developed diplomatic ties with Indian rulers, particularly in regions such as Gandhara and Punjab. Indian sources, including Sanskrit texts and inscriptions, refer to the Hephthalites, or Hunna, as both destroyers and rulers. In some areas, they settled permanently, establishing local dynasties that intermarried with Indian elites and adopted regional customs. These diplomatic relationships reveal the Hephthalites' pragmatism. By maintaining a flexible policy, employing warfare where necessary and diplomacy where beneficial, they carved out a durable position in a volatile world. The Hephthalite Empire was inherently multicultural, reflecting the diversity of the regions it ruled. This fusion was a result of their migratory origins and their incorporation of conquered peoples into their expanding empire. As nomads who settled in urbanized, historically rich territories like Bactria, Sogdiana, Gandhara, and Turkestan, the Hephthalites came into close contact with Iranian sedentary cultures, Indian religious traditions, and Turkic nomadic practices. From the Iranian world, they absorbed administrative techniques, coinage styles, religious ideas, especially Zoroastrianism, and elements of royal iconography. Their political elite adopted Persian court customs, and their cities were often organized along lines familiar from the Sasanian administrative model. From India, they borrowed artistic motifs, religious philosophies, and linguistic forms. Their presence in regions like Gandhara and Kashmir exposed them to Buddhism and Hinduism, and they became patrons of Buddhist monasteries and art. Their Hunnic and Turkic heritage was retained in their military organization, nomadic lifestyle, especially in the early period, and social structures. Steppe culture remained a defining feature of their warrior elite, and they continued to use tribal symbols, animal motifs, and steppe-style fortifications. This cosmopolitanism allowed the Hephthalites to rule over a broad and diverse population with some degree of cohesion, making them not just conquerors, but also adaptable and culturally integrative rulers. Hephthalite-era art is remarkable for its syncretic nature, blending Greek, Iranian, Indian, and Central Asian influences into a distinctive style. Their most enduring artistic contributions are visible in Buddhist art from regions such as Gandhara, Bamiyan, and Turkestan. In Gandhara, which had been a center of Greco-Buddhist art since the Kushan period, Hephthalite influence is evident in the increasing use of Central Asian stylistic elements such as elongated figures, frontal poses, and stylized garments. The colossal Buddhas of Bamiyan, which once stood over 30 and 50 meters tall, are often associated with Hephthalite patronage. These monumental statues, carved into the cliffs of the Hindu Kush, displayed a unique fusion of Indian and Hellenistic sculptural traditions, blended with nomadic motifs like flame crowns and lotus halos, features thought to have been introduced or supported by the Hephthalite elite. In Turkestan, murals and stucco sculptures from Buddhist monasteries such as those at Er Tam, Dilberjin, and Balalik Tepe reveal a vibrant artistic environment during the Hephthalite era. These artworks often depicted figures in Iranian-style dress, noble courts, processions, and religious themes, showing a clear blending of Zoroastrian, Buddhist, and Indo-Hellenistic iconography. Hephthalite coinage is another major artistic legacy. Their coins frequently imitated Sasanian silver drachms, but included distinct modifications: fire altars without attendants, unique crown designs, and tamgas, tribal emblems that were characteristic of steppe nomadic identity. These changes demonstrated their desire to assert both legitimacy and cultural distinction within the region. Architecturally, while the Hephthalites did not develop a unique monumental style of their own, they supported the continuation and adaptation of Kushan and Persian architectural traditions, maintaining and patronizing temples, monasteries, and urban infrastructure in the cities they governed. The Hephthalite religious environment was pluralistic, accommodating a range of faiths that mirrored the empire's diverse population. Evidence points to the presence of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and local animist or shamanistic cults across their territories. Zoroastrianism, the dominant faith of their Persian rivals, was practiced in many of the Hephthalite-controlled cities of Khorasan and Bactria. Some Hephthalite coinage depicts fire altars, a central symbol of Zoroastrian worship, though the omission of attendants and other traditional Persian elements suggests either a simplified adaptation or a different theological understanding. Buddhism flourished under Hephthalite rule, particularly in Gandhara, Turkestan, and Bamiyan. The construction and maintenance of monasteries, stupas, and colossal Buddha statues during their reign suggest that the Hephthalites, though possibly not devout Buddhists themselves, provided material and political support to Buddhist institutions. This patronage helped sustain monastic life and artistic production long after the decline of the Kushans. In India, Hinduism continued to be practiced by the majority population. While the Hephthalites were initially perceived as destructive invaders by Indian chroniclers, Over time, they integrated into the religious fabric, with some Hephthalite rulers adopting Indian titles and participating in Hindu religious practices. Finally, remnants of pre-Zoroastrian, animist, or shamanistic cults likely survived among the nomadic Hephthalite clans. These would have included rituals centered around sky gods, animal spirits, and ancestral worship, typical of Central Asian steppe peoples. One of the most remarkable cultural features of the Hephthalite Empire was its capacity for syncretism, the blending of different religious and cultural traditions into a cohesive whole. Rather than impose a uniform belief system, the Hephthalites allowed multiple religious communities to coexist, adapt, and influence one another. In the visual arts, this syncretism is particularly visible. Buddhist murals sometimes featured Iranian noblemen, steppe warriors, and Indian deities, all within a single narrative. Inscriptions and iconography demonstrate how religious symbols from Zoroastrianism and Buddhism were merged or adapted, such as flame halos appearing behind the heads of Buddhist figures, a likely Iranian influence. Even their coinage reflects syncretism. While they imitated Sasanian designs, they incorporated Indian symbols, Central Asian emblems, and Greek-influenced busts, producing a hybrid style that resonated with diverse subjects across the empire. Politically, syncretism allowed the Hephthalites to maintain stability in regions with different traditions. In India, they appointed local governors and intermarried with Indian elites. In Iranian regions, they adopted local customs and administrative methods, including the use of regional scripts and tax systems. This cultural flexibility was a source of strength, enabling the Hephthalites to govern effectively across a sprawling empire without provoking widespread rebellion. Language was another domain where Hephthalite adaptability is clearly evident. The primary language of administration in their empire appears to have been Bactrian, an Eastern Iranian language written in a modified Greek script. This continued the tradition of the Kushan Empire, which had earlier promoted Bactrian as a lingua franca across Central Asia. Numerous Bactrian inscriptions, particularly in Afghanistan and Tajikistan, attest to the Hephthalites' use of this script in formal declarations, coinage, and administration. This choice reflects a strategic cultural alignment with their Iranian and Kushan predecessors, offering continuity for the local populations while asserting Hephthalite authority. At the same time, local languages such as Sogdian, Middle Persian, Pahlavi, and Sanskrit were also in use, depending on the region. Sogdian, in particular, was important for trade and international communication, especially along the Silk Road. In Indian territories, inscriptions in Sanskrit and Prakrit reflect local continuity under Hephthalite governors. The use of multiple languages and scripts allowed the Hephthalite administration to reach various ethnic and religious communities, facilitate commerce, and record legal transactions. Their linguistic legacy, particularly the preservation of Bactrian and the hybridization of scripts, offers valuable insight into the cultural complexities of their empire. The seeds of decline were sown within the empire itself. By the early 6th century, the Hephthalite state had grown large and diverse, encompassing numerous cities, tribes, and ethnic groups across Central Asia and northern India. Managing such a heterogeneous realm required strong and adaptable leadership. However, after the zenith of Hephthalite power in the late 5th century, the political structure began to fragment. It appears that rival Hephthalite clans and factions began competing for power. This weakened the central authority and led to localized rule by regional governors or military elites, particularly in far-flung areas like Zabulistan, Kabulistan, and Tokharistan. The lack of a unified chain of command reduced the empire's ability to respond to external threats or maintain consistent policies. Moreover, their system of governance, which had always relied on a loose confederation of tribal leaders, lacked the bureaucratic depth of the Persian or Indian empires. While this system worked during the phase of conquest, it proved unstable once the empire transitioned to a sedentary urban-based rule. The cultural and religious plurality of the empire, which had once been a strength, began to present difficulties in the absence of a strong ideological or administrative center. Discontent may have grown among local populations, especially in border regions, as central control weakened. While the Hephthalites contended with internal instability, a new and deadly threat was emerging on their northern frontier: the Gokturks, also known as the Turkic Khaganate. These were powerful steppe nomads who had recently broken free from the Roran Khaganate in Mongolia and begun pushing westward. At the same time, the Sassanid Empire, under Khosrow Enushirvan, r. 531-579 CE, sought vengeance for the Hephthalite humiliation of the previous century, including the death of Peroz I at their hands in 484 CE. Recognizing a shared enemy, Khosrow forged an alliance with the Gokturks, a rare moment of cooperation between a sedentary empire and a nomadic power. This alliance was politically and militarily effective. The Gokturks attacked from the northeast, while the Sassanians struck from the southwest, executing a coordinated assault on Hephthalite territory around c. 560 CE. The most decisive confrontation in this campaign was the Battle of Bukhara, where the Allied forces crushed the Hephthalite army. The details of the battle remain scarce in historical records, but its consequences were far-reaching. The defeat shattered the Hephthalite confederation, dislodged their ruling elite, and sent the remnants fleeing into mountainous regions and fragmented territories. The Battle of Bukhara, likely fought near the historic city in Sogdiana, marked the climax of Hephthalite decline. The Hephthalites, already weakened by internal factionalism, were unable to match the combined strength of the Gokturk cavalry and Sasanian infantry. Their political and military leadership was decimated, and control over key regions such as Bactria, Sogdiana, and Khwarezm was lost in the aftermath. Following their defeat, the Hephthalite Empire ceased to exist as a unified political entity. The once dominant nomadic force that had subjugated Persia and devastated India was no longer capable of large-scale organization or imperial expansion. Their leaders either fled or submitted to the new regional powers, especially the Gokturks, who took over much of the steppe domain, and the Sassanians, who reasserted their influence over eastern Iran and Central Asia. Despite the collapse of the Central Empire, Hephthalite fragments persisted in several regions where local rulers, likely of Hephthalitic descent, continued to exercise limited power. These included the Zabulistan and Kabbalistan principalities in southern Afghanistan, as well as Tokharistan in the north. While these states were no longer imperially dominant, they retained cultural and political continuity with the former Hephthalite ruling class. In Zabul, for example, a dynasty known as the Zunbils, possibly descended from Hephthalite aristocrats, ruled from the 6th to the 9th century, worshipping the god Zun, a sun deity. Similarly, in Kabul, rulers continued to issue coins and resist Arab-Muslim expansion until the early Islamic conquests. These local polities adapted to their changing environment, forming alliances with neighboring powers, or submitting to suzerainty while preserving distinct cultural traditions. In Tokharistan, Buddhist monasteries and cultural centers remained active, even under Turkic or later Islamic influence, often blending Hephthalite legacies with those of their successors. Although the Hephthalite political system collapsed, their cultural and artistic influence survived well into later centuries. Their distinctive iconography, coinage style, and urban traditions influenced both Turkic and Persian art. Hephthalite-style crowns, garments, and motifs can be traced in later Sogdian and even early Islamic visual culture, particularly in mural paintings and metalwork. In Buddhist art, the stylistic forms popularized during Hephthalite rule, such as flame halos, winged figures, and stylized lotus thrones, continued to shape Central Asian Buddhist iconography. The urban layouts of cities like Balkh, Herat, and Merv also retained features from the Hephthalite period. Moreover, the memory of the Hephthalites lingered in Persian and Indian literature, where they were often portrayed as fierce warriors, foreign rulers, or semi-mythical invaders. While sometimes demonized, these portrayals nonetheless attest to the Hephthalites' lasting impression on the collective historical consciousness of the region.